Let's go to Canberra now and catch up with the Federal Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud. David, thanks for joining us. First up, I just want to follow up on that report. You don't have to be critical, put it the other way around. We can all be very proud of the way Australia's kept infections of coronavirus to a minimum. It's very, very enviable position compared to other countries around the globe. You can have that position, but also look at what we've done, especially with hard border closures, extreme lockdowns in Victoria and some of the other states, to admit that with hindsight, we should have done less, especially state governments should have done less to crack down on our economy in order to manage this pandemic.
Yeah, Chris, I think there's some good points there. In reality, we're always going to learn out of a pandemic, one that we knew very little about when it hit. But we learned very quickly, and I think that's the point, and that's the point that I've been making probably since about June, that these arbitrary decisions by states to lock down borders, predicated for political parochialism and political expediency when elections were coming up, rather than backing one another with science. We should have a modern federation where we could have trusted one another with the science, the contact tracing, so that we had localised lockdowns. And I think that's one of the things out of federation that we should learn, that it was tested and tested severely during this. And we shouldn't be afraid to look at all our actions, not only federal government, but state governments as well, about what we did and how we did it. And I think a modern federation should trust one another, work together and work as one. And unfortunately, we had this situation where states acted unilaterally, predicated, and particularly if someone living in the regions, they had arbitrary decisions predicated on capital city policy, not thinking about how the regions needed to continue on, despite the fact they hadn't even seen a COVID case within hundreds of kilometres. So I think if there's anything to be learned, I think, and there is for us to look back and be honest with one another about how we could have done this better. But we should be proud of what we've done. We've achieved a lot as a nation, but there should always be time for us to reflect and to put in place proper plans into the future.
Yeah, spot on. Look, as Agriculture Minister, you've had a year of real swings and roundabouts. I mean, the drought has broken for large parts of Australia, which has been a great thing, and some bumper crops being harvested as we speak. But of course, the coronavirus pandemic has impacted on, especially when it comes to labour in the agricultural sector. But the spat with Beijing, the diplomatic row with Beijing, continues to hurt our agriculture sector. You know, barley farmers have been hit hard, the wine sector, we've had some meat exporters, and now timber exporters hit by China, the latest bans on Australian exports.
Yeah, look, and we're continuing to work through that, but we should be proud of the fact that ABARES estimated that by June 30 we'd be about a $60 billion industry. We're now looking at $65 billion, and that's on the back of a bumper winter crop. And despite China's actions on barley, we haven't seen a significant drop. There's about a $10 to $20 drop per tonne, which is still obviously out of our pockets, but we've been able to send them into other markets because of the quality of our product, and that's been important. With respect to the other commodities, wine is obviously a significant concern to us. There's $1.2 billion worth of exports. It's around 37% of our total wine exports into China. And the timber industry is obviously reeling as well, and they are probably exposed more than any other agricultural industry. So we're going to work through with those industries about our next piece of action, and we're not afraid to use the independent umpire. We think there's mounting evidence now that this is not to do with technical trade matters, it is to do with other matters that they've raised, particularly around our sovereignty, which we will not relent on. We will not compromise our sovereignty, the values and principles that hundreds of thousands of Australians have given their lives for. No Australian government will ever do that, but the only way in which we can rectify this, and in fact China is able to demonstrate not just to Australia but to the rest of the world that this is nothing to do with our sovereignty, is to start dialogue and to have constructive dialogue at ministerial levels. And as I've always said, my phone is always on and my door's always on, and that is the best way in which to resolve any issues, whether they be internationally or even in your own home.
Well, the way things are going at the moment, China will be more likely to be listening into your phone calls than actually dialing your phone themselves. So let's hope that changes in the new year. I just want to ask you about the industrial relations issue, which is up again because of the government's new bill. When you look back to work choices, long time before you were in Parliament, I think, but one of the key mistakes that John Howard made in work choices was this idea of the better off test. There was the possibility in the original work choices that workers could be worse off under some of the deals struck. That's a weakness that you're opening up again with this package, isn't it? Saying that if businesses are affected by coronavirus, then under the arrangements, workers could do a deal that sees them worse off.
Well, this is just political desperation of a party that's found themselves irrelevant and obviously having leadership tensions. This provision is already in current legislation.
I'm not quoting Labor. This is the point. This is a provision that's in the legislation.
Well, I'll go on to explain it, Chris. Yeah, and that's what I was about to explain. They're trying to single out a very small portion of this bill that really already exists within the current legislation for drought, natural disaster. And it's simply a provision that allows for COVID-19, this pandemic that has hit the world. It's not something that is new or anything insurmountable, but it just goes to show that the Australian Labor Party is desperate to cling on to any juncture whatsoever they can because of the political desperation they find themselves in. Now, we'll obviously continue to work through, and I know the Industrial Relations Minister will make sure he works through these issues. But the important point about this also is that that provision can only come into place if the employer, the employee, the union themselves all agree that that provision should be put into place. So there's safeguards in there, as there already is in the Act. But because we're in the middle of a pandemic and we're trying to get ourselves out of this pandemic recession, there has been pragmatic moves in which to try and create jobs in this country. Now, I know the Industrial Relations Minister has shown great conciliation to the union movement and will continue to do that, and he'll work through those issues. But this isn't anything earth-shattering. It's just the fact that Labor are desperate, politically desperate. They've got a leader on the ropes and there's plenty circling behind that are prepared to take his job out. And so this is just them trying to save his job and make them finally irrelevant on something.
David Littleproud, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, mate.
That's the Federal Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud.